that, and
Exactly. Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. We are here for Change with Ted Williams. It is Wednesday night, folks, and we are excited to be with you. We kind of come on here and there and just talk politics. There's so much to talk about in the world. Really, the whole point of our discussions is how we can change our lives and change the world. And so I always am blessed to have these amazing, amazing panelists that I get to talk politics with and really help elevate the conversation and the discussions around issues that impact us. As I teach my students every day, politics and justice, they are not spectator sports. They require every one of us to get involved and to really understand the issues. And I think that it is incumbent upon all of us to at least educate and empower ourselves so we can make a difference in our community. So tonight we're talking about schools reopening, and we're talking about criminal justice reform in Illinois, HB 3653. So if you're watching tonight, please share, like the page, let somebody know, drop a comment in there. Guys, we really want to hear from you, and we want to connect with you, and we want to make a difference in our world. So I want to introduce our guests tonight. Two wonderful, wonderful people who I'm just really excited to have here. And so the first guest that I want to introduce is attorney Ken Thomas. And Ken Thomas is actually a former candidate for the state Senate of Illinois, actually Barack Obama's former seat, which I think is very cool. And Ken did very, very well. And as he knows, and I know, sometimes in politics you do your best and you get really close and things just don't work out, but it means that there's something else in store, and so we go ahead and we do what we have to do. But Ken now is an associate at Fox, Swibel, Levin, and Carroll. Welcome, Ken. Why don't you just say hello to our audience for a moment, would you please?
Yeah, thanks, Ted. Thanks for having me on, and always happy to join the group and talk about politics and current events. So I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Awesome. Thank you so much. My second guest is new to our program. It is, but not new to the battle for justice, that is for sure. It is Lorraine Cruz, who is an educational administrator, principal extraordinaire, principal coach, consultant, and leader in the community around issues of justice, particularly for marginalized communities. She has an organization called Learning with Lorraine, LLC, in which she trains educators on how to do their work better. Lorraine, welcome. Why don't you tell a little about what you're up to these days before we hop into our discussion?
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's exciting to be on. Well, I'm a 35-year educator. I'm coaching principals, aspiring principals, assistant principals, people in leadership. I'm certified both nationally and have been an adjunct professor at UIC. And I am currently holding down my own principalship at an alternative high school.
Fantastic. Okay, that's great. We got great credentials here. Now let's get into this stuff, man. I'm sorry. Most people talk about politics and they're all sour about it. I get excited about these things because, honestly, maybe it's just cathartic for me. Maybe I just do this for therapy. Because I don't know about you, but they watch the news, you get all upset, and you gotta let it out. So, Lorraine, let's talk about school reopening. Is your school, the schools that you're working with, are they open? Are they not? What are you guys dealing with around parents wanting to come back, not wanting to come back? I've got some data that I'm going to talk about around the country, but I want to talk to you first about what's happening on the ground with the questions of school reopening.
Well, I'm currently working in a charter system, and I'm in a high school, and we know that right now the high schools have not been reopened. But then the controversy around the high schools not reopening is that there's been a push for the high school athletics to be up and running and going. Right? And so there's controversy between those staff members that are union members in schools that are unionized. Not all charter schools, for example, are unionized. So there's that battle going back and forth. I'm also coaching two principals. One that's in a charter system. Their schools are still on doing remote learning, and then a CPS school that is now partially returned, right? So they're kind of in the hybrid situation. And my best and dearest friend is a Chicago public school teacher. So trust me, we have this conversation almost on a daily basis. And as they struggle, teachers are struggling. I was a teacher, and I'm still a teacher. I consider myself a teacher for life, but I was formerly a teacher for over 20 years. Some teachers are feeling pressured from both sides of the entity. They're feeling pressured from their union. They're feeling pressured from CPS. Principals are caught in the middle because the principals are not making the decisions. The principals are following whatever the plans are that are kind of being dictated from the top down to what they should do in terms of opening or not opening the schools, having the hybrid process or not. So there's still a lot up in the air. And right now, we know the Chicago Public Schools, the teachers up to 5th grade are back in the buildings. And on Monday, Monday, the students should be returning from K through 5, and there's still pushback. We have a lot of parents. There was an original concern around why did they bring back the diverse learners or special needs students and the preschoolers. And when we look at the parent input that has been received just across the country, not even just exclusively to Chicago, but across the country, what we're looking at is the special needs students need a lot of support that the parents are not equipped to provide at home, right? And so they were like, please, let's get them back into the schools. And that's a smaller population than the overall population, unless you are in schools that are in predominantly Black and Brown communities where there's an exuberant number of diverse learners students been identified as diverse learners, and that's a whole other conversation for a whole other day. But we're looking at so yes, let's bring those students back in, right?
That's a very good point. This is such a politically contentious topic. I'm looking at a map right now that shows that the vast majority of states don't have hard and fast rules about schools reopening. There are about 4 states that actually are ordered open, so their schools have to be open. That's Iowa, Arkansas, Texas, and Florida. And I'm sure Ken could give us some commentary about some of the political history around there. We could talk. Puerto Rico actually has a full closure in effect, so the schools cannot open up. But most of the schools are kind of a hodgepodge mix of reopening and that sort of thing. Ken, why don't you talk to us about what you think about this question of sort of states kind of figuring out on their own, the federal government trying to determine what do you think is effective? Obviously you've run for office and you've spent a lot of time thinking about how do we solve our problems. I've got lots of thoughts about federalism, but I want to hear yours around this question. Should states and localities be able to just figure this out for themselves?
Yeah, I think the answer is yes. And I think, that for all the talk of sort of states' rights and the idea that we have a patchwork of different localities and states that are going to develop their different rules, that over the long term, we'll sort of see some different things get tried out, and the best ideas will then rise to the top. I think that applies here better than anywhere else. Cities are trying to manage the science with the CDC saying that, look, we don't think that schools reopening poses a massive risk to teachers and students if they're properly distanced and they're in modern facilities, and balance that with the desire, the very real and reasonable desire of many teachers to want to make sure they're safe, make sure they're not bringing home the virus to their family and spreading it. And so we're trying to meld these two interests, and I think it's very important that we look to some cities that are doing it right. New York City is doing it right. I think LA is doing it right. They're really saying, look, we're going to try to make sure that teachers are vaccinated. Teachers who want to be vaccinated will be deemed essential workers, just like we have a bunch of other essential workers. And we're going to get them vaccinated before we force them back into a classroom, because CPS doesn't all have the most modern schools. They don't have modern systems at the school to make sure that that the air is being circulated in the way that it's supposed to be, or the space to make sure that everybody's being distanced, right? In a perfect ideal world, every school would be updated and modern, would have all the resources able to make sure that we were having people safe. But if we can't make sure that teachers are going to be safe and students are going to be safe, knowing that in-person learning is the most desirable way to make sure that kids are learning, we've got to make sure that kids are safe and teachers are safe. So They got to be vaccinated.
So CPS has invested, $100 million into sort of making sure that these places are ready for the teachers. But one of the biggest issues for the teachers union in the beginning was this question of vaccination, right? Should teachers be forced to go back if they are not vaccinated? And Lorraine, I want to talk to you as an educational administrator, right? How do you deal, how would you deal with this? This question of, spacing, 6 feet, kids wearing masks, washing their hands, all this other kind of stuff. And then on top of that, vaccination. What is your thought about sort of the standoff that existed between the teachers union and the city in that way? And what do you think ultimately, how you would execute this? Because it seems like an administrative nightmare to me, in all honesty.
It is. And again, I will say that the one group of administrators that is really not being engaged in the conversation for some solutions at a higher level are the school level principals. They're just not. A lot of the decision making is happening right from the district levels on down. So the principal is caught between a rock and a hard place. They really want to support their staff. We want kids back in the building. And so it's a precarious situation. Like, well, which side we fall on, right, in terms of who we're outwardly supporting the most. So I do believe that teachers should be vaccinated. In my case, for example, I'm in an alternative school, which means my school is actually housed inside a university here in the city. Okay, I have one floor that is my entire school. I do not have the facility to separate safely students with social distancing, right? That's my reality. I'm not, and then when we look at like I love the old fashioned CPS buildings because I love the woodwork and they have the ginormous high ceilings. So getting the circulation going is a little easier in those settings because they have more space. But then you're looking at buildings that need to be retrofitted for a lot of that actual oxygen. One of the things they say is that if you can have your windows open, that's a really good thing, right? And they even recommend that for you in your household. If you're going to have people coming over, open as many windows as possible, right? Well, that's not necessarily doable in a lot of the school buildings, right?
Yeah.
Very old infrastructure that needs a lot. It needed a lot of work before the pandemic.
Right.
Let's go now.
I gotta ask you all the question because I try to operate just straight off of common sense, folks. I mean, I don't know. Some people think I'm smart. Some days I think I'm halfway smart. Some days I don't. So I just try to operate straight common sense, and common sense tells me that here we are in the middle of this pandemic, and to be fair, not much has changed between now and February and what we were dealing with in, say, September, with the exception that people are getting vaccinated, and I believe some places numbers are going down. But I have felt like this move to get back in schools has kind of had these arbitrary deadlines and sort of these random, like, okay, it's Wednesday, we're just done, we gotta get back in school, which I get the need and desire to, but I'm really looking to see the markers, to suggest, hey, 20% of the population is vaccinated, or all the teachers are vaccinated, or something, and we're moving forward without that. Am I missing this, or is that?
No, I feel your frustration because I in that sense, I feel like I'm an outsider looking in, especially when I'm coaching or supporting other principals, and when I'm coaching and supporting teachers. Then I have a lot of families. I have a lot of my own family that are CPS students and youth in the community, right, in the school system, not only in Chicago, but also in the suburbs, right? And for me, I talk a lot with, I have a dear friend of mine who's a retired principal at this time. And so this conversation is at the forefront of all of our discussions because we're in these schools supporting the principals, right? And from the beginning of all this, one of the things that I said in our conversation was, this school year, there's 4 months left of this particular school year. Nothing is going to drastically change student progress in those 4 months. So why not utilize the 4 months to create a staggered type of beginning of opening So that then by the end of the year, we have worked on how we're going to get everyone in the buildings. So that come September, everyone now understands the process. Because at the end of the day, come Monday, they're going to be kindergarten through 5th grade. That's 6 grades of kids, depending on the size of the school, anywhere from 2 to 3 classrooms for each grade, all coming in at the same time, when there have been no practice of protocol and procedures and processes in place in each individual school, because every school footprint is different. So why not start maybe, okay, we're gonna get these teachers, this group of teachers vaccinated and this staff vaccinated. We're gonna start with 2 grades at a time. We already started with special needs and with pre-K because those groups need socialization and more support. So it makes sense to start with those 2 groups. That's fine. Now let's add 2 more grades. Whether you add the next 2 grade or the next one in the higher and work your way down.
Right.
Give a few weeks, have everybody routine in the process so that when the next group comes in, it's not total chaos. Now it's located learning, and the students that are already in the process and the staff can support the new ones, and so on and so forth. That
you know what? You're
kind of my take on it.
You're making too much sense. Are you running for like Secretary of the Department of Education or something like that? Because I mean, it just seems so simple, but whatever. What do I know? So, Ken, I'm gonna give you the last word on this topic, and then we're gonna move to another topic. But I want to say Hector Pimentel, who is hitting us on the line all the way from New Jersey. What's up, Hector? Who's actually a teacher out in New Jersey, and I've had many conversations with him about this. This is a national challenge, a national issue, right? A national problem, and they are going through the same thing. He teaches sort of in South East Jersey, if you will, on the shore in that area, and they are going through the same thing and having the same sort of administrative debacles and sort of people being put at risk as they're out. And it is very frustrating. Ken, why don't you give us the last word on this before we start?
Yeah, I'll just finish just by saying I think we ought to make sure the teachers are vaccinated or have the option to get vaccinated before they head back. That's all. And it looks like that's what Chicago's going to do.
Awesome. And I know I will tell you, but the mayor was originally not trying to do that. And let's make that clear, not to, throw shade or anything like that, but there was almost a bit of mockery around that. I remember from some conversations. Like, it was like, you think that, I'm going to get all these other folks, get you vaccinated before everybody else. And, I try to be fair with our mayor. I think the jury's still out in certain ways, and so she deserves the benefit of the doubt. But that was not a very comforting statement that I heard when I heard that. But anyway, I want to talk about some good news for a moment, right? Because, guys, the fact of the matter is, when you're talking about politics, so often people are looking at, what's bad? I want to share something that's really good. And Ken, I'm going to let you jump off onto this at first. But HB 3653 is probably one of the most progressive criminal justice bills in the nation that just passed here in Illinois. And we're really leading the country in this. They say that the states are the laboratories for democracy around the country. And I believe, as I see what's happened in Illinois, this might be a precursor for what we're going to see at the national level. So HB 3653 ends cash bail in the state of Illinois. It ends prison gerrymandering, in which if you are basically taken down from one community to another, they don't get to count you in their census so they can have more representation. I mean, think about the perverse incentives that exist there. Ends the purchase of military weapons by police officers. Those are a few. I'm going to keep talking about it, but Ken, I want to let you hop in on this. What else does HB 3653 do? And are you excited about this bill? And tell us why.
Let me start out by just saying thank you to the folks who were involved in this. I mean, Governor Pritzker, Speaker Welch, President Harmon, various of the sponsors in the House and the Senate. They are very deserving of some credit here in leading the nation, as you mentioned, in passing a progressive and comprehensive criminal justice reform bill. And I hope that Illinois, as the first mover in this category, will be a place where it will be a laboratory and people will see the positive results that come from this, and will implement the same in their states. So as you mentioned, some of the big ones, obviously the bill ends cash bail, which means that when you go into court and you've committed a crime, you are innocent until proven guilty. If you are poor, you will not be put into jail and given a bail amount that you cannot pay. Essentially, if you're poor and you were provided with a $10,000 bail for some people, that is a sentence to jail that they cannot be able to get out on. And we've been criminalizing poverty for way too long, and so I'm glad to see that in the bill, and I'm glad to see how that will work. Another big aspect of the bill is that police officers throughout the state will be required to wear body cameras. Every police officer in the state, which to me is common sense. Oftentimes in our criminal justice system, the police says one thing and the victim says the other thing, and then we believe the police and we move on because there's no evidence, right? And so now the body cameras will be required on all police officers. That will allow us to have transparency in some of these.
And let me say something about that real quickly, and I'm gonna let you continue. But people are oftentimes sort of feeling polarized in these questions, and like, oh, we're defunding the police. This doesn't defund the police. And even for like small towns, they have until 2025 before this actual piece of legislation goes into effect around the body cameras. And the larger cities have, I think, another year or so, which many of them are doing anyway. But, there is progression in this. And I think people need to understand that when these kinds of policies pass, they're not sort of designed to attack one group or another. They're really designed to bring much needed reform. Please continue, Kim.
Right. I mean, anybody who believes in a transparent democracy with liberty and justice for all, nobody who believes in those principles can disagree with body cameras. Mm-hmm. I mean, it brings in needed transparency into police interactions that often are seen by nobody, and we can't verify what's gone on. And if recent history has been any example, it has shed some light into particular police interactions that really needed light shed into those interactions. But the other thing it does is it protects police officers. Body cameras in situations where police officers are under threat, or has somebody say that, oh, the police officer did this and did that was in violation of the law. Those body cameras will show, as police in many instances say, that it didn't happen. It'll be on the camera. So it protects police officers as well as people who interact with police. And that's why it's good, regardless of your partisan affiliation. Yeah. The other thing that the bill does, which is really, really key and really important, as it requires the licensure of police officers. So you've got to meet a certain set of standards to be licensed in Illinois. And there will be a database that a police department, who it will be a prospective employer of a police officer, will be able to search that license database and make sure that person is still licensed, hasn't committed a crime or some other misconduct or have a pattern of misconduct before they hire them. And so they'll know when they're hiring that officer what is on their jacket, what sorts of things that they've done, and whether their license has been revoked. So that's also incredibly important.
That's very, very important. And I also want to just throw this in there. It bans chokeholds. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, George Floyd's death changed the world. And we wouldn't be talking about these kinds of things if this had not happened. And so, we want to give respect to, obviously, him and his family. But this has been, there's been a sea change in this country, which I can tell you that I'm very, very excited about. Lorraine, what do you think about this? Are you, is this something that you're excited about? I know that, even with your students, I know that they are having interaction with the police and that sort of thing. So I'd love to get your thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, well, and especially my population of youth, I work with 16 to 21-year-olds, and many of our students actually do come from DOJ, right? They come from juvenile justice. They come to us, I call them the students that have been kicked out, pushed out, thrown out, dropped out, etc. And so a lot of them, unfortunately, many of my students are both on both ends of the spectrum in terms of the legalities, right? Committing some of the crimes and victims of the crimes and that kind of thing. I always have an issue with the term defunding the police because I think it creates an opportunity for people to go to extreme under belief or following. It should be redistribution or appropriate distribution of funding in the community, right? Because defunding the police does not mean that we're going to take that we're going to end the police. I think people think of it as what, so we're not going to have any police, or they're not going to get paid their salary. No, it means how about we redistribute the resources in the community to change the process. So I strongly believe in the cameras, even though, and we're talking about it, and George Floyd was a sad situation that changed the world, but did it? Because even with video camera, there has yet to be a conviction of any police officer in any of the cases that have happened across the country.
Say that again.
Where we have the video footage.
Okay.
Of
except in Chicago.
Oh, except in Chicago. Ken, okay, so I'm going to stop you there, Lorraine, because you really hit something on the head. We feel like there's been a sea change. There still has not been. I mean, there's a cultural change. There hasn't been a legal change. Ken, I want you to talk to us as an attorney. Why is it so hard to prosecute police officers? You mentioned that it has happened in Chicago. Why don't you explain that? But tell us why the bar is so high and what can we do? What has to change?
Yeah, before I get there, just want to mention real quickly another key portion of this bill. When you're arrested and detained, you get 3 free phone calls within 3 hours of your arrest. That is also part of the bill, and it's very important to making sure that we're realizing justice with people who are arrested and presumed innocent. Remember that, presumed innocent until proven guilty.
That's awesome.
So to answer your question, Ted, there are a couple reasons. One, juries. These bills, they change laws, they change the rules on the books, but they don't always change hearts and minds. And we live in a society that has viewed criminals as guilty before they're proven so, has elevated all police, even though we know that there are bad apples in the police department, and the police department has its own systematic issues that results in people in communities of color, in the Black community, in being disproportionately arrested, sentenced, charged, abused, laws violated against. So that it doesn't change the hearts and minds of juries. It doesn't change the hearts and minds of the police officers themselves. And so that makes it difficult. It doesn't change the hearts and minds of prosecutors. I mean, obviously, Chicago's history with this is you had a prosecutor who literally lost their job, Anita Alvarez, because she refused to prosecute this police officer. So now you have prosecutions going forward, but in some of these instances, like in Michael Brown's case, we're not so sure the prosecutors were really doing their darnest to actually bring charges. In a lot of these instances, the prosecutor decides to go to a grand jury, and we have a saying in the legal community that a prosecutor can indict a ham sandwich with the grand jury. Basically, the principle is if you're a prosecutor, you can basically indict anybody you want to a grand jury because you get to control the flow of witnesses and evidence to the grand jury. And so in some of these instances where we're listening to a grand jury report that they're not going to bring charges, me and colleagues of mine, we're thinking to ourselves, what do you mean? Prosecutors can basically have anybody charged who they want when they take it to a grand jury. So I know some of these prosecutors are not trying to bring cases, and so they make it go to a grand jury so that it disappears. So you have people using those kinds of tactics to make sure that charges are not brought. So the key is hearts and minds are not changed by these bills. It's important to change the laws so that we have them where they have to follow these rules. But when it comes to juries, there's still lots of work to do.
Wow, that's a very important point. Dr. King said you cannot legislate morality, but you can regulate behavior. He said that I cannot stop someone, cause someone to love me, but I can stop them from lynching me. And I certainly think that is worthwhile as well. And so that is really where we are. I'm a firm believer that sometimes it just takes legislative changes to usher in cultural changes later. Sometimes the cultural changes come first, then the legislative changes. Sometimes the legislative changes come first, and then the cultural changes. And maybe, we're so far off on this issue. Think about this. We are so far off on this issue. I don't know the exact statistic in terms of how many police are prosecuted, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say it is very, very low, right? And
even lower for convictions.
Exactly. In terms of these cases, I read somewhere it was something like, less than 5% or some even worse than that, actually. And so, so we're so far off on this thing. And I know that people are in the line of duty, and so there's a little bit of a different level of culpability than if they were on the street, right? But right is right and wrong is wrong, and justice ought to be served. And we recognize in the world where there is no justice, there is no peace. And people have a genuine sense of fairness and want to see people punished for what they have done that is wrong. And when that doesn't happen, the society, we have many, many problems. And so I'm encouraged, but I can tell you we still have a very, very, very long way to go. Lorraine, what would you want to say? Go ahead.
I was going to say that a lot of it has to, a lot of this has to begin at home. It has to begin in our schools. And one of the things that I'm really proud of, especially since I've been working with this alternative high school system, is that we have designed the curriculum, the resources that we're speaking and sharing with our students, especially around critical thinking and around civic engagement and what does that mean. And so our high schoolers have to take the Constitution test before they graduate high school. And what they've been accustomed to, which is what I remember even when I was a student, was we got the study guide, we memorized the questions, we did the test, we passed the test. 5 minutes later, don't ask me anything about what's on the test because I only learned it to memorize it to pass the test. So we have, in our school in particular, we have revamped our curriculum and the topics that they are studying, analyzing, doing critical thinking, reading about, doing the science, doing the math on, are around these real world topics that they're engaging with as young adults in their society. And so how to become more responsible citizens in their school, in their community, in their city, and in the world, right? Because, the internet has made us truly global citizens. And so we're talking about police brutality, looking at resources, studying the laws, what are the laws in different states, what's going on, looking at current events and newsreels. They're learning about advocacy. They're learning about being activists in an appropriate way. So we're really engaging them in real live discussions and debates and critical thinking around these topics. So that's really critical. I think that's important. I think it's too late to begin in what happens to be one of the largest alternative school settings that I'm working with this particular small group, 16 to 21. Sure. I would love to see this. And part of my mission moving forward is I'm so close to retirement from working from somebody else's.
No, you're not, Lorraine. You're too young to retire.
35 years, my dear. But
I thought you said you were 35, Lorraine. You can't, you know what I'm saying? 25, you can't be retiring now,
I started at 5. But really what I want to do is be able to work on education through what I believe are the right channels, and partnering with people like the two of you, right? That are involved in these, and you have your voices in the communities through different aspects and perspectives, and help to create a well-rounded young person.
I want to say this to you right now, as someone who teaches political science every day with young people. You don't know how excited I was to hear what you just said about your Constitution test and what you all are doing. And I'm pledging to you publicly in front of whoever's watching or whatever. I really want to be involved in some way, shape, or form with that. I'm doing some other programs myself like that. But I know for a fact that it is so, so critical to engage young people. I spent the day not only teaching my students, but I spent the day with my kids who are being homeschooled right now because of the pandemic, doing a civics class for them, and they're reading about high level cabinet member work in the presidency and that sort of thing, because I tell you, it is so important to ignite them. And so, Lorraine, I want to jump up and down when I hear what you're doing over there, and I want to be engaged. Ken, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I just want to jump in here quickly. I think it is so important that we look at the world through the lens of our young people. We are seeing a massive distrust of institutions in society today, and it's in part because we have a number of young people who see the world as we try to teach it to them, as one with rules and one with order, and they don't see rule following, they don't see order. I had a bunch of kids when I was in law school. I mentored a bunch of kids who were interested in being lawyers on the south side of Chicago. And they would tell me daily about how they would go home, walking home from school, and 2 to 3 times a week, the cops would just stop them, ask to search their bag. And I would say to them, you have a constitutional right to not have your bag searched without the cop having some reason, some legally justifiable reason to search your bag, reasonable suspicion or probable. And they said, oh, they don't care about that. They don't follow those rules. They don't care. And so when we talk about what we need to do to make sure our young people are growing up and are seeing the world as they should be, we need to make sure that the people who have power in society, police officers who are supposed to be acting in our best interest and pursuant to the Constitution and the laws, that they actually do, and that they're incentivized to do so. And that's been the problem, is that police officers don't have much disincentive. You mentioned it, Ted, that there's very little charges, there are very little convictions, and we're talking about murders. Those are crimes that have bodies. Imagine crimes that don't have bodies, or they hit somebody, or they assaulted somebody, or they beat up somebody who is being detained. There is a culture of silence in our police department, and there is not in our police departments, and there is not much of an incentive for an individual police officer to turn in another officer. In fact, there's a disincentive. We know that they'll end up on desk duty. We know that they'll end up losing their job. There's a story in West Virginia about an individual cop who was a Marine who de-escalated a situation with somebody instead of shooting that person, even though they had a gun, and that person was fired because they did not shoot. Look it up, West Virginia, police officer. He did the right thing, and everything I could see, he was fired because he didn't shoot the person, which is crazy to me. So we really need to focus on putting in disincentives for our police officers for doing bad things. That means accountability. That means charges when crimes are committed. That means punishing officers who don't tell the truth. And that also means, I think, in my opinion, and there's been some literature out there, is actually making police officers, instead of cities providing these big settlements on account of these suits that happen because police officers sometimes do bad things, we ought to require police officers to have their own insurance. And if they do something bad, they've got to file a claim. Your insurance goes up. There's a negative economic incentive to actually be bad on your job. And once it starts hurting people's pocketbooks, people will be better. Once you change the economic calculus, people will act in their own financial self-interest. We just need to jigger it in a way so that the bad behavior is actually disincentivized and is in their own negative financial self-interest.
Yeah, doctors have malpractice, and
lawyers have malpractice.
And anyone who in the school system, any external organization that comes in to provide support and resources for schools must have their own insurance.
Yeah,
so that is part of the contractual agreement before they begin to provide services. It makes complete sense. It makes complete sense, and that I agree with you.
Well, yeah, I know that firsthand because I do some work with the schools. You don't get in the door without the insurance. I just want to say you guys have been fantastic, and I really, really have enjoyed this conversation. I can tell you that We may not be able to change everything in our sphere of influence, but each one of us, that old saying that says each one must reach one and each one must teach one. And I think as we have these discussions, we enlighten and inspire somebody. Even if we are enlightening and inspiring each other to go back out and do the work, But I know that folks who are listening today have been enlightened and inspired as well by you all's wisdom. You guys are fantastic. I'll just give you a second just to sort of tell us anything you want to let the audience know that you're working on or anything like that before we go, or how they can reach you. Please feel free to do so. Ken, why don't you start?
Yeah, I'll start out. Thanks for having me on, Ted. Love talking about these topics. And I'm actively involved in working on these topics. I actually serve on the police board at UIC, which is actually looking at reforming the police and how their police department is run and governed, and the oversight, and working on making sure that it is more transparent, and that there are more students and faculty and members of the general campus are involved in the oversight of the police board. So actively involved in these issues. I think they're really important, and thanks for inviting me on.
That is awesome. That's good to know that you're doing that at every level. You don't have to wait to change the federal government. You can change the policing right at your local college campus. I am very, very excited to hear that. Lorraine.
Well, I can be reached at Lorraine.Cruz at learningwithlorraine.com. I have been supporting, I just presented for the Illinois Principals Association on equity and justice and social justice for our youth in our communities across the state of Illinois. I just got invited to be part of a focal group around equity in the schools for the state of Illinois through the Illinois State Board of Education. And I'm getting ready to present on equity and justice for Black History Month around women entrepreneurs for the state of Nevada. So I definitely could stay involved and informed, and I work across the country. So if any school district or anyone is looking for supports around equity, justice, bilingual education, and supporting of underserved communities, reach out.
Awesome. You guys, many blessings in your work. We have to keep on rolling. As Dr. King said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. We're going to get there as long as we got folks like you out on the battlefield. Have a great night, you guys. We'll see you all next Wednesday night on Change with Ted Williams. What are we talking about next week? I have no idea. We're going to find some crazy political stuff to talk about. Something's always coming up during the week, so we'll get into it. But I hope that you all will join us. And hopefully what we will not be talking about is our former president, which we spent 4 years talking about every night. So hopefully we will not be talking about that. I couldn't go a whole show without mentioning him. Good night, everybody.